Prologue. Roland and his companions confront Blaine the Mono, a sentient train that controls their fate. Blaine challenges Roland to a riddle contest, but Roland refuses, insulting Blaine in an intense verbal showdown. Blaine, enraged, threatens to kill them, but Roland remains undeterred. He proposes a deal. If Blaine can solve every riddle they pose by the time they reach Topeka, they will die. If Blaine fails, they will be spared and released to continue their quest for the Dark Tower. Blaine reluctantly agrees, accepting the terms of the contest. As Blaine prepares for the riddling challenge, the ka-tet, a group bound by destiny, braces for the mental battle ahead, with their lives hanging in the balance. The contest begins as Blaine, now reluctantly engaged, challenges their riddles with the stakes of life and death. Part 1. Riddles. In Chapter 1, the decaying town of Candleton is introduced, where irradiated ruins still pulse with a grim life. As Blaine the Mono, a sentient train, passes overhead, the town is briefly torn apart by its sonic boom. The path toward Rylea is marked by mutated wildlife and ominous signs of the world's decay. In the barony coach, Roland and his ka-tet, Susannah, Eddie, Jake, and Oy, prepare for their riddling contest with Blaine. Roland plans to start the riddling, and each member of the group takes turns asking Blaine riddles from Jake's book, testing its intelligence. Blaine answers all riddles effortlessly, exuding confidence and smugness, while the group tries to find a way to challenge him. Roland, aware of Blaine's vast knowledge, hopes to discover Blaine's weaknesses. As the riddles progress, Roland's resolve strengthens, though doubts linger about the challenge ahead. The stakes rise as time runs out. In Chapter 2, Jake struggles with the mental and emotional toll of the journey, haunted by fear and uncertainty about their riddling contest with Blaine the Mono. After enduring numerous trials, including being questioned by the TikTok man and surviving the nerve gas in Lud, Jake's hope fades as he senses doom approaching. He begins to feel a strange connection with Blaine, realizing the machine has made a critical mistake by offering a sexual experience and that it might be vulnerable. As the contest continues, Blaine answers each riddle without hesitation, causing the group to feel increasingly powerless. The barony coach passes through a vast chasm and approaches the Falls of the Hounds, a sight that unnerves everyone. Blaine, now running on battery power, announces his plans for a kamikaze run to reach Topeka. Roland, aware that Blaine is nearly unbeatable, prepares Jake for the final riddles, knowing their survival depends on finding a stumper. In Chapter 3, Eddie plays a crucial role in outsmarting Blaine the Mono during their riddle contest. As Blaine answers each riddle without hesitation, Eddie realizes that the computer might be vulnerable to silly riddles, which frustrate him. Eddie challenges Blaine with a series of jokes, pushing Blaine to the edge. As the group nears Topeka, the pressure builds, and Eddie delivers a final, clever riddle that forces Blaine to hesitate. Eddie's persistence rattles Blaine, eventually causing the computer to malfunction. The barony coach goes out of control as Blaine's systems fail, but the group survives. They prepare to exit the coach with Roland and the others supporting Jake as they climb to safety. Eddie reflects on how his persistence and Roland's teachings helped them survive, and the group escapes the wreckage of the coach, leaving Blaine behind. In Chapter 4, the group arrives in Topeka and is struck by its eerie silence and the strange atmosphere. Jake notices a green road sign confirming they are in a version of Kansas, but Roland's world has shifted beyond recognition. The group hears a metallic sound, which unsettles them, and Roland experiences a flashback to the past involving the big coffin hunters. They find a newspaper that reports on a deadly superflu, Captain Trips, that has ravaged the world, leading to millions of deaths. The group realizes they are in a world affected by this plague, though it differs from their own. Roland explains they may have passed through a Thinny, a tear in the fabric of reality, and that they must be careful. The group prepares to continue their journey, realizing they need to find the beam again despite the uncertainty of the path ahead. In Chapter 5, Roland and the group travel through eastern Kansas and encounter a mysterious glass building ahead. Eddie is puzzled by its appearance but continues on as Roland seems determined to ignore it. They camp near the building, which glows like a palace at sunset, its reflective surface mesmerizing to Susannah. Roland remains quiet, clearly troubled by something in his past. Later, Roland begins recounting a story about his past, focusing on his trial of